Hello, Professor Anton. Now, this is, I think I was calling you Professor Anton. My apologies, it's Professor Anton, I guess. Um, yeah, I know I'm coming into this conversation a little out of context. I'm just seeing this video and not the other issues about ontology. But I think there's a couple issues. First of all, I want to know what do you mean prior in what sense? Prior by what criteria, chronologically prior, logically prior, what? I'm one of those that believe that epistemology is at the bottom. Now, there is an existence prior, there is an ontology of epistemology that, in a sense, has to exist for you to do epistemology. And I think that is basically an ontology that involves perceptions and perceptions being processed. So basically perceptions, though there's probably an important distinction in the perceptions and the ideas that process them. Sometimes we don't perceive that directly. Often we would perceive the results and we consider the perceptions have been transformed. So for example, we have a perception and then something in our brain makes a memory of that, and later on that produces a perception when we remember. So, in terms of ontology as a study of knowledge, as a study in philosophy, yeah, I think it comes later because we start with an ontology of perceptions, and by sorting those, all of the ontologies like round and these kinds of things you mentioned uh, come to have meaning. If somebody said, that round, without ever having done the epistemology of looking at all of the perceptions that imply to us this concept round, from which we abstract the concept round, we would have no meaning. We couldn't have gotten that concept. So you can say this is ontological in the sense that, okay, yeah, we have this existence of perceptions prior to analyzing the perceptions, and we see that pattern persist because, for example, we tend to have an extension of a word far before we have a decent intension. We have a decent extension, identifying the pattern well enough for extensional purposes, and we don't have an intentional definition yet. And this is similar to saying, oh, well, the concept exists before we actually have the knowledge of what it even means. But part of where I think that you and I would diverge in the way we're looking at this is you're talking about poetic statements and saying, is that meant literally? But the thing is, I believe in a current cognitive science approach where basically all statements are metaphorical. And in cognitive science, you can make literal statements about, space, perhaps. But even time, you start to have metaphor. Even the things that are so-called literal, we use metaphor, So basically, all statements are metaphorical. And so, nothing is meant literally. So there's still epistemological criteria if somebody is very poetic and the words are interpreted with these wide meanings and, excuse me, and so on. But there still has to be a knowledge claim. It still has to mean something. Like if Nietzsche says God is dead, well, that's not literal because he didn't think, God actually lived. God is an idea, though, and therefore he's talking about the idea being dead. Okay, well, there is the semblance of a literal meaning. No, it's still a metaphorical meaning, but we've reduced it down to, well, what does it mean in the real world? What's the material meaning? How does the metaphor map down? And if I say life is a journey, that's still a metaphor, but it might be, map even more literally than something that's more poetic. So yeah, that's my approach on that issue, and I just think that some of it is this need for a metaphysics. The idea that an ontology would proceed, to me, seems related to the idea that you need a metaphysics before you can have knowledge. Cheers.